Hey, what's up guys? It's the Orig Media podcast and this is episode 6. So on this podcast, I want it to be about filmmaking, videography, screenwriting, our careers, the business side of it, and storytelling. And basically I just want to share the things that I learned about filmmaking and ideally start a discussion and build a community about the things that will make us all better filmmakers. And the world can definitely use more really good filmmakers. So in this week's podcast, what I'm going to cover is the best camera for video. And this is going to be, I think, multi-part. So in this first one, I'm just going to discuss the considerations. And then we'll go into the quote of the week at the end and tie it all up, okay? So let's just kind of jump right in. I think there's really no single perfect camera. Each camera serves a purpose and could be the right tool depending on the job. So the cameras out there right now that we can shoot video with, for the most part, I think they are broken out into different groups. So the first group is your cell phone, webcams, point and shoot cameras. These are the point and shoot digital still cameras that have like a built-in lens in there. GoPros and consumer camcorders. So this is kind of the lower end of the spectrum. And then if we go a little bit higher than that, there's the prosumer camcorder. And kind of how I define the prosumer camcorder is it's really designed to be a video camera, and it might have XLR connections for the audio, so it's like a professional connection for the audio for microphones, but the lens itself is built in, so you can't change the lens out. For me, I consider these more of the prosumer camcorder. And then there's DSLRs. These are originally built for shooting stills, but many of the DSLRs, or we can even just call these interchangeable lens cameras, are designed for stills, and they have added video functionality to them. So this could include like the Canon 5D Mark III, maybe the Nikon D800, the Panasonic or Lumix GH3, and like the, I guess the GH2 and GH4, which is coming out. And the next group are pro camcorders. So this could be something like the Panasonic VariCam, where to me, it's really designed as a video camera. It's meant for video production. So this has interchangeable lenses, and it has built-in XLR to the camera. It has BNC connections and HD SDI connections and that kind of thing. Things that are meant for professional video production. And then the final group, at least in my mind, are pro cinema cameras. So this is these are like the Orig cameras, or the cameras from Red for the most part, and even the cameras I think coming out of Blackmagic Cinema, or the Blackmagic Cinema line. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But all of these serve a different purpose, and many of you may own, from different groups of these cameras, and you use them for different reasons, and we'll kind of get into that. So I guess the question then a lot of people are asking, and I always get asked, is what's the best camera for video? And I think really what they're asking is what's the best camera for me? So I want to start the conversation with what do you currently shoot? And there's a long list of stuff that you could be shooting, from home movies, quick projects, long events, live editing, commercials for films, reviews, video blogging. Do you need to shoot still photos? Do you need low light capabilities, like shooting at events? Or do you need wide angle lenses in order to shoot in a small space, like an office or maybe some interview situations? all of those considerations, I think, will guide you as to which camera is going to be the best for you to shoot for video. And in the case of if you do need to shoot stills, maybe you need a camera that can shoot both. To save on money, maybe you need something that can shoot both video and stills. So what's the different criteria, or what are the differences between all the cameras? And I think for me, I've tried to list this in order, and if you're listening to the MP3 version on the podcast, we'll have this presentation available, and you can definitely take a look at this, but I will list it out, everybody, for those that are listening on audio. I think the number one deciding factor, one of the main deciding factors as to which camera is good for you is your budget. If we had unlimited budget, you could get one of everything. But I think for most people, we don't have an unlimited budget, so we got to pick and choose which tool is going to serve our needs the best. And so I think number one is price. Then I feel like maybe sensor size might be another very high-ranking decision choice or option, I guess. And because what sensor size typically will dictate is a lot of different things. So for example, sensor size will affect your field of view, how wide of a shot that you can get, your different lenses and the mounting options that you have. So if you're picking some obscure lens mount, then you may not have many choices in changing lenses, and maybe the way you shoot or what you shoot, you need that variety of lenses. So even something as, for example, like an iPhone or a point and shoot camera, your lens options are very limited because you can't remove the lens on the iPhone and change it out. You can get adapters, but the quality of those adapters to make it wider or more telephoto, like zooming in, is not necessarily the highest quality lens, and it'll affect image quality. The sensor size also affects depth of field. Depth of field is a way of describing what's in focus. So for example, if you have an image that has something in the front, something in the middle, and something in the background, then depth of field is the way to describe what is in focus. Is it all in focus, or are you able to get just one thing in focus and then everything else is out of focus? So like the background's out of focus and the foreground's out of focus. If that's important to you, and for a lot of people it is, so that you can kind of isolate your subject, then it starts to narrow down which camera you can use, and that is directly related to sensor size. Also, light sensitivity. Light sensitivity, for the most part, is often related to the size of the sensor. The larger the sensor, typically, the more sensitive it is to light. So if you need to be shooting in dark conditions, then that's definitely a consideration to think about. Also, autofocus. Is autofocus important to you for shooting in video mode? Because not all video cameras are created equal when it comes to autofocus. For example, the DSLR cameras, for the most part, have pretty bad autofocus, especially compared to even your prosumer camcorders, even the consumer camcorders for that matter. And definitely on the professional camcorder, the autofocus tends to be excellent. Frames per second. Now, what this means is, do you have the ability, or at least what I intended with it was, do you have the ability to shoot slow motion? And the best way to shoot slow motion is to shoot more frames per second. So typically a video camera or a motion picture camera will capture at either 24 frames per second, 25 frames per second, 30 frames per second, and maybe even 60 frames per second. Now, what you can do is you can shoot, let's say, at 60 frames per second, but then you play it back at 24 frames per second. When you do that, it will slow down the image, but it will be pretty clear. So more expensive, or well, at least the way it is these days. Well, no, I'll take that back. Some cameras are able to shoot at higher frame rates. So whether it's the Sony FS700, which I believe can shoot up to 960 frames per second at a little bit lower resolution, or even I think around 480 frames per second at a higher resolution. That will give you some very slow motion images. Or even the iPhone. The new iPhone is capable of shooting 120 frames per second, and that'll give you that slow motion effect. So is shooting slow motion very important to your work, or can you live without it? And then there's the question of resolution. Resolution, there's SD, which is kind of getting deprecated now. It's standard definition, and then there's HD, which seems like it's the standard these days. And now the big trend this year, and especially this year actually, there's a lot of cameras that are coming out that shoot 4K video. And one of the big debates or discussions surrounding 4K is that while yes, we can shoot at that high of a resolution at 4K, pretty much no one has any kind of monitor or TV, even on the professional side, that is able to resolve that 4K. So you can shoot at 4K, but when you watch it, you can't even see that 4K resolution. I will say though that the cameras that do shoot at 4K, or at least the ones that I'm looking at, the ones that do shoot at 4K, if you downsize the image or downsample the image from 4K down to HD, in that downsampling process, it retains a lot of the detail and a lot of the information in the image, and you end up with a very beautiful image. So some people want the 4K for that reason. So again, is that important to you? Are you able to handle your workflow shooting at that high of a resolution? You'll have to keep in mind that if you shoot 4K, the file sizes are typically going to be a lot larger than shooting at HD or especially at SD. So again, is that very important to you? Now, another difference that you should consider is the recording time, or the recording duration of individual shots. And this is important because, for example, if you shoot a lot of events that may go on for an hour, 2 hours, half a day, or a whole day, or so on, maybe a DSLR camera that has a limitation of 12 minutes per shot is not the right camera for you. Or if file sizes get so huge over long periods of time and the recording media is very expensive, maybe that's not the right camera for you. But if you're shooting very short shots and you can live without long recording durations, then maybe other cameras start to open up for you as choices. I think another consideration to think about is in-camera image stabilization. Are you going to be shooting a lot handheld, or will you be using a tripod or some other stabilization device? If you're going to be shooting a lot of handheld, then maybe you need to consider a camera that has in-camera image stabilization, so that if you're holding it handheld, it's not going to be so shaky and very disturbing or difficult for your viewers to watch. Now, this next one is ISO ranges. And basically what that is ISO stands for International Standards Organization, and they had set up a I guess, a measuring standard on the amount of light sensitivity, originally what film had and now what digital sensors have in the cameras. So if you're a video person, you may know this as gain, but I prefer ISO. And so basically it ranges from, I'm not sure what the lowest I've seen, definitely on the film side there's anywhere from 25, 50, 100, 200, 400, 800, and so on. And the highest that I'm aware of on a camera that is currently for sale is, I believe it's 25,600. Now, there's a camera coming out in this summer which will have an ISO that goes all the way up to 400,000 plus. I think it's 409,000. And I can kind of go on about this, but basically I think what I want you to take away from this is the higher that number, then the more sensitive to light that camera or that sensor is. And that can be a great thing. If you need to shoot in dark conditions, like in a bar at night, and you're not able to add additional lighting, then having a very sensitive camera to low light, it can be very useful. Now, I list on here, there's the ISO ranges, there's the max, what they list as the max, and then there's the actual usable, because oftentimes they're not the same. That the Canon 5D Mark III, for example, can go to something like 25,600 or thereabouts, let's say 25,000 ISO. You can shoot video in that mode, and you can see an image, but it's not very clear. It's very noisy, and I personally wouldn't consider that really that usable for almost every single project. Maybe on something where you just have to see anything, then yeah, you might be able to get away with using it. But for the most part, I don't think it's usable. For me, I think the max usable ISO on the Canon 5D Mark III in video mode is somewhere around 6400. That is still extremely sensitive to light. So you can be in very dark conditions and still shoot at that 6400. Whereas something like the Canon SL1 has a much lower range. While I believe you can expand the ISO maybe to 12,000 ISO, I personally think maybe the usable highest ISO you can use on the SL1 is 800. You might be able to get away with 1600, but I think it's getting pretty noisy at that point. So 800 versus 6400, it's a pretty big difference. You're talking about it's like 3-stop difference, which is another measurement of light. So keep that in mind. Is low light, shooting in low light, very important to you? And an indication of that is finding out what the ISO ranges are, and then figuring out and looking at what is actually usable. And then here's another consideration to think about, and what a lot of cinematographers discuss at length is dynamic range. And what dynamic range basically is the differences that the sensor is able to resolve between how light an image is and how dark an image is in the same image. So basically, how close to reality can the sensor differentiate white from black and all those steps of gray in between? And it's often measured, dynamic range is often measured in f-stops. So great cameras will have a dynamic range of 12 stops. So from the brightest part of the image to the darkest part of the image, that sensor can resolve 12 different shades, essentially. Well, that's not the right thing, but 12 stops of white and dark, light and dark. And your lower end cameras, typically, let's say like a webcam, is going to have a much narrower dynamic range. It's not going to have that 12, 13, 14 stops of dynamic range. Maybe a web camera will only have 5 or 6. And typically how it works is wherever the normal exposure is, then it might have that normal exposure, then 1 and 2 above and 1 and 2 below. So your darkest area is only going to be 2 stops below, and your brightest is 2 stops above. And so what ends up happening is the image doesn't look as good. It may not be immediately perceived, but even untrained eyes know when an image looks nicer than one that comes from a lower end camera. And so it's dynamic range. Once you start to learn a little bit more about cinematography, you'll find out that dynamic range is key and very important to that. So, if you're doing video reviews of, let's say, of cell phones, you may not need the super high-end camera that can shoot with 14 stops of dynamic range, or 13 stops of dynamic range. Maybe all you need is that web camera that's on the top of your laptop, or it depends on your brand. Maybe you do want something a little bit higher end, but maybe you don't want to spend the $100,000 or the $30,000 that it might take to get you into one of those super fancy cameras. And then another thing to consider is there a clean HDMI out, or in fact, I should say, is there a clean video source out and a clean high quality video source out? I think for the most part, for most consumers, this is not really a concern, but this is something that would be relevant to some professionals, and even not all professionals. What this means is if there's a clean video signal out of the camera, you can record in many cases to the camera itself, to the card or media that you put into the camera, but then you can have a separate source coming out and you can record it to a separate recorder, or you can send that feed to monitors so that clients or the director or someone that is not actually manning and operating the camera, they can look and see what's actually being filmed. For most people, that's not that important a consideration, and even, I would dare to say, for many professionals, that's in a lot of the shooting cases, it's not necessary all the time, but it's definitely nice to have for the pros. So think about that if that's something that you'll need. And then I think the final difference that may be of importance to a lot of shooters is, does it have a flip out screen? There's many situations where having a flip out screen is convenient. It's not necessary, but it's convenient. And whether you're putting the camera low towards the ground and you don't want to be on the ground with the camera and just kind of maybe kneeling or crouching by it, the flip out screen helps. If you put the camera up high, again, you want to flip the screen down so you can see it. It's nice to have. Not totally necessary, but it's, again, nice to have. So, but if it's important to you, then you definitely want to, weigh out which one is, which of these features you'll need the most. So again, you're going to have to kind of weigh which of these features and which of these things do you really need the most, and what's most important to what you're shooting right now. Because if your budget's limited, you won't be able to get everything all in one camera. Even if your budget was unlimited, you really actually can't get all of this in one The size of the camera itself too, I think, is very important. I think if you're going to be doing a lot of, well, let me put it this way. A smaller camera can be very convenient, and you can always make a small camera bigger. And the reason why you might want to make a small camera bigger is to make it easier to handle and more stable. If you're hand holding a small camera, all that the shake in your hands and your arms will be seen in the image. But one way to remedy that is you can make the camera heavier and bigger, maybe put it on a shoulder mount, and all of a sudden it's much more stable. Now, the reverse cannot be said about large cameras. You can't take a camera that's already large to begin with, and you can't make it smaller. So if having a small camera is important to you, like the GoPro, for example, very small, and you can put the GoPro in all kinds of different places, whether it's on the end of a surfboard or mounted in various positions in a car, or even just mounted to your own body, that would be very difficult to do with a large camera like the Red Epic, for example, and or the Red 1. And you won't be able to put the Red 1 in the same spots as the GoPro. So add that to your list of differences. So what I'm going to do now is talk about the pros and cons of each group, because again, this is just more informational and to get you thinking about what might be the right camera for you. So let's start with the cell phone, the webcam, the point and shoot, the consumer camcorders, and the GoPros. Kind of why I've lumped these guys together is because they, in terms of budget, they kind of are all very close to each other in budget for the most part. I would say anywhere from like $400 or less. In many cases, you already own this camera, and so in theory it could be free to you, right? One of the pros, small form factor. You can put the GoPro, as I mentioned, or any of these cameras in a lot of different places, and you can always build it up. And typically these cameras have long shooting times. You can just hit record and it'll record until the card gets full, for the most part. The only camera I think in this grouping that might have maybe a 30-minute limitation is the point and shoots. So cameras like the Lumix or Panasonic LX7, which I happen to own and I love. And so yes, another pro, these cameras tend to have a very quick cycle in terms of manufacture and improvement. So each year it seems as if they're coming out with a new version of that camera, and it's getting better each time. And it's all kinds of reminders going off for me here. Now here's some of the cons. Usually it's poor low light. So if you're in a dark place, the image will usually look grainy and or dark. And if you do a lot of shooting at night or indoors at night, then this might not be the right tool for you. And then typically the image quality is lower than what you might be able to get in a different group. And that's due to a variety of reasons. One is the sensor quality, and two, the lens quality as well. So typically it's lower quality image. I won't say it's a low quality image. Definitely you can get some cheapo cameras that have low quality images, but the GoPro, the iPhone, and a lot of these point and shoot cameras actually shoot a very good image for video. So don't immediately dismiss the image quality just because it's a less expensive tool. Another con for a lot of these cameras, focus is hard to control. Either the autofocus functionality on the cameras is just kind of non-existent, or challenging to use, and you know the camera is just deciding for you what is going to be in focus, or you know you just can't focus it at all. And then along those same lines, the other things that as you learn more about video and filmmaking and you know, image quality is controlling your white balance, the ISO, the shutter speed, and the aperture size. And so all of those things typically on these cameras are difficult to control, or in fact you may not be able to control at all. So if that's important to you, then these cameras may not be the right tool for that purpose. And again, as I mentioned before, you can't change the lenses on these cameras. So you can, as I mentioned, you can add adapters and filters, but the quality of the glass on those is not necessarily the best. And so what may happen is your image is as good as the lowest quality piece of glass in that whole equation. So if you have, just even on very expensive cameras, if you have a $10,000 lens that's mind-blowingly amazing, but you put a bad filter in front of it that is cracked and scratched up and dirty and has chromatic aberration, all kinds of craziness, then who cares if you have that $10,000, $100,000 lens? If you have a piece of junk filter on the front, it won't matter. So the same thing with all these cameras. You can have a decent quality image coming out of your GoPro, but if you put some sort of adapter on there that is low quality, you're gonna have a low quality image. And then one other con for video is you may or may not have an external microphone connection to connect up a better microphone, or you may only have a microphone connection that hooks you up to 3mm jack. So again, if that's important to you, if you're going to be shooting, you know, interviews, or you need the sound of what's happening in the situation, these cameras may not be the best choice for that. Oh, and then one other con: these cameras, for the most part, it's difficult to create shallow depth of field. Basically, where if you want to make the background blurry, then you're going to have a hard time doing that. And in some cases, like let's say the GoPro, for example, you may not be able to create that shallow depth of field at all. You may not be able to make the background blurry at all. And again, if that's important to you, consider that. And most of these cameras typically are not that wide angle. So if you need to shoot wide angle and you want to get a wider perspective, these cameras may not be the right choice for you. And that's for most of these cameras. I mentioned on here the GoPro actually has kind of the opposite problem. The GoPro might be too wide for you. There is a medium and narrow mode on the GoPro Hero 3 and 3 Plus, but again, that still might be too wide for you, and consider that, I guess. Now the pros and cons for the prosumer camcorder. Pros: it's semi-affordable. If you're going to be doing some serious video work, maybe event work or interviews, or maybe even for your you do video reviews and blogging, that's somewhat affordable. And maybe some of you are decrying that right now, but let's say from the $1,500 range to the $4,000 range. Pros: these cameras nowadays, they come in a small form factor. It's about this, let's say this big, maybe the size of a small loaf of bread, half a loaf of bread. And they have long shooting times. So if, for example, you want to shoot events, this could be perfect, where you can just hit record and it can roll for an hour continuously or 2 hours continuously. Also, these cameras seem to be getting better each year as well. I think Sony is definitely putting out new cameras in this space every year or every couple of years. So now the external microphone is either maybe through a 3mm jack, but a lot of these camcorders actually will have some sort of XLR connection, or at the very least an XLR adapter. So if having XLR input direct to your camera is very important to you, then this might be a solution for you. And these prosumer camcorders, they actually have a lot of, they'll have typically built-in image stabilization. So you can hold the small camcorder or these prosumer camcorders in your hand and get relatively stable footage because of the internal stabilization. Oh, I will add, I didn't write it on here, but I will add that these cameras will typically also have excellent autofocus functionalities. I used to own a an HDV camera called the Sony A1U, and that had excellent autofocus capabilities. So now the cons. Usually it's poor in low light conditions. It looks kind of grainy. Image quality, not low quality, but lower quality than what you can get in other cameras. And this is due to, I think, lack of dynamic range. So in these prosumer camcorders, you may only have a dynamic range of, let's say, 6 stops, maybe 8 stops, and it's noticeable. What tends to happen is that it just looks more like video. When you think of video, it looks more like video rather than looking like film. Another con, you cannot change the lenses. You may be able, and you can definitely, well, not definitely, but you may be able to add adapters and filters, but again, not the greatest quality. So, consider that. And typically on these prosumer camcorders, they have a small sensor, so it's difficult or challenging to get that shallow depth of field. So if making that background is blurry is important to you, then the prosumer camcorder may not be ideal. And typically the cameras, the lens that's built on there, it's a zoom lens, and it may not be that wide of an angle. So let's say if you're shooting indoors and you need to shoot like a group of people inside an office, you may not be able to pull far enough back to get everybody into that image. So, that's just one example. Now the DSLRs, there's pros and cons to the DSLR. The pros, they're affordable. You can buy a DSLR that shoots video for as little as $500. And I think all the way up to $3,500. There are more expensive DSLRs that you can buy, up to even $7,000 or more. But I think the typical ones that at least I'm going to talk about are from the $500 to $3,500 range. The image quality, excellent for video. Very high quality image. That's a factor of dynamic range and lens choices and low light sensitivity. In fact, one of the pros, you can change the lenses. And in fact, depending on the manufacturer of the camera that you get, whether it's Canon, Nikon, Sony, or Micro Four Thirds cameras, there's a huge variety of lenses. They are made for stills, and they're very high resolution lenses, but I'll discuss one of the cons on the lenses in a moment. So like I was saying, there's a large selection of lenses, from wide angle and specialty lenses like fisheye lenses or even tilt shift lenses, all the way to telephoto and super telephoto, where you can even shoot through telescopes. And some of these cameras have unbelievably amazing low light capability. Like I mentioned before, Sony is coming out with a 4K full frame DSLR or interchangeable lens stills camera that can shoot video with the ISO going all the way up to 400,000 ISO, which is insane. Another pro, small form factor. As I mentioned, you can always build a camera up bigger, but you can't take a big camera and make it smaller. So with these small form factors, you can stick a DSLR under the hood of a car, or even inside of a car, like right in front of the driver, and you can mount it in like on the dashboard facing the driver. And that's very difficult with much larger cameras. These cameras typically have good dynamic range, which leads to a higher image quality, and not the highest dynamic range that's available, but very good dynamic range. So your image quality is going to be excellent. Now the cons, there's poor autofocus for video, poor to almost non-existent autofocus for video. And if that's important to you, and if you're not good at, or you don't want to manually focus, then that's definitely a huge con. To shoot video, while you can just buy the camera and a lens and just start shooting video right away, I personally think you need a few more items, additional support gear, in order to shoot video a little bit better or a little bit easier. So I think for DSLRs for video, you're going to need some additional support gear. Editing can be resource intensive, and what I mean by that is that these cameras were not really built to be shooting video. They added video as an afterthought, and in doing so they chose a codec, a video compression decompression that is not ideal for editing. And so when you take those files, bring them into your computer, it's definitely can be taxing on the system to use those files. I think systems are improving, definitely, so this is not as huge of an issue as it was before, but keep it in mind. And DSLRs typically have some sort of video recording limit. Older DSLRs like the Canon 5D Mark II or the Canon 7D, the T2i, they had a limitation of 4 gigabytes or 12 minutes, whichever one I guess hit first. And then nowadays the limitations on all the DSLRs, almost all of the DSLRs that I'm aware of, have a limitation of about 30 minutes, 29 minutes, 29 minutes, 59 seconds. And that actually is a limitation that they've set because of, from what I understand, there's a tax law in Europe that if a camera shoots longer than 30 minutes, it gets taxed at a different way. So all these cameras have disabled the video record limits to just be under 30 minutes. So if you're going to be shooting long continuous events, and it's important for you to have one long continuous take, this type of camera may not be the best camera for you. Oh, no built-in ND filter. So if you're used to some prosumer camcorders have it, or professional camcorders have it, where it's a built-in neutral density filter or ND filter. So if you're in very bright conditions, you can lower the amount of light that's coming into the camera by using an ND filter. And on the DSLRs, they do not have a built-in ND filter. Now, you can put an ND filter on the outside, so on the lens itself, on the outside. So that's one way to work around it if you need that. Also, these cameras do not have built-in XLR. Some of them do have a 3mm microphone jack, but if having XLR is very important to you and having that sound, that XLR quality sound married to your image in camera is very important to you, then these may not be the right cameras for you. Again, there is a workaround for this. You can buy an adapter that if your camera has a 3mm jack, you can buy a XLR to 3mm adapter and kind of work around that. And for the most part, these cameras do not have built-in image stabilization. They do have image stabilization on some lenses, but it's not in the camera itself. There is one camera that I'm aware of that does have it. The Sony, I believe one or two of the Sony cameras on the DSLR or the interchangeable lenses cameras, it does have image stabilization on the camera itself. So that's the one exception. But for most of the DSLRs or the interchangeable lens cameras, then that may not be part of it. All right, so now the pros and cons of the professional camcorder. So pros, there's high quality image, good dynamic range, maybe not the highest dynamic range out there, but it is very good dynamic range. You can change lenses. There's good autofocus. There is a built-in ND filter, built-in XLR. There's actually also built-in usually HD SDI or SDI out for a high-quality image out. All kinds of monitoring features, whether it's Zebra for making sure that the focus is exposed properly. There's also even focus aids and that kind of thing. So lots of features to help a shooter get a good image. Cons, expensive, anywhere from $7,000 to $60,000. There's no additional you will need additional support gear, whether that's a high quality tripod or some other types of support gear. The lens selection is expensive. While you can change the lens, the people that actually know that own these cameras or these types of cameras, I find that at the most, they may have one other lens. Almost everybody that I know that has this type of camera maybe only has the one lens, and that's all they use on the camera. So to me, that's kind of a con. You're limited to whatever lens that you get with it. Large form factor. Well, that's great for handheld work. It helps to keep it stabilized. You can put it on your shoulder and shoot. It is large, so it's harder to make smaller. One of the pros that I will say though is that your zoom in and out is excellent typically on these professional cameras, because the control on there is very smooth, and that kind of goes in line with that good autofocus. Now the professional cinema cameras, pros and cons. For the most part, great image quality. This is your top of the line image quality, whether it's the Orig Alexa or the Red cameras, even your Blackmagic cinema cameras. These render very beautiful images. Typically have built-in XLR, not the Blackmagic for the most part, but your Orig and your Red should have some XLR input on there. Now the cons, expensive, anywhere from, on the cheap side, I think on the professional cinema side, maybe $3,000 if we're gonna include the Blackmagic line, but let's say we don't include the Blackmagic line, and you're then looking at maybe $15,000 at the lowest possible side to get in on a professional cinema camera, and I'd say actually closer to $30,000 all the way up to $100,000 and beyond. You can spend a ton of money on a cinema camera. Maybe not something that you necessarily buy, maybe you rent. As I was kind of mentioning, the Blackmagic cinema line, kind of, maybe, you know what, that's almost like a prosumer cinema camera. Maybe it's in a class of its own. Not quite professional cinema camera, and not really falling in under all the other stuff. Another con, you'll need a lot of additional support gear, whether that's cards or SD cards that are SSD drives, I should say, that are either proprietary to the camera itself or very high-end type of support gear. So it adds up very quickly. If you're spending $30,000 just to get in on the camera, the cards might be another 500 or 1,000 or thereabouts. They are very resource intensive, typically, because you will then need a support crew to help you shoot with these cameras. It's possible to shoot it by yourself, run and gun, but it's challenging. Oh, and it's also resource intensive, I should say, on the editing side, because with these high quality images, you're going to get much larger file sizes, and it's going to just be more taxing on your system, whether it's more hard drives, you need faster processors or graphics cards in your computer to help render the image more easily. And then also, typically you'll be shooting the image in a non sort of user-friendly manner. Like, it will produce either a raw image or you might shoot in log, which you need additional steps, whether to transcode that footage into something more editable, and then at the very end you'll probably definitely want to color grade the image, meaning you'll have to take a whole nother step of making the image pretty. So it's not just what you see is what you get kind of thing. It's you can shoot what's there and you can do all kinds of changes in post, but it requires, again, more resources. So keep that in mind. If you're considering this, you probably aren't necessarily listening to this podcast or this particular episode, because you already know all the other stuff that I've explained. But just for people that are getting into this, I kind of want to let them know this is definitely much more intensive resource-wise. And I'm kind of alluding to it. You need lots of knowledge in order to work this these types of cameras properly, and on set and in post. So consider that. Now, I guess it boils down to what is the best suited or most suited tool for the job. And I've kind of broken it down here, and these are not hard and fast rules. These are just kind of guidelines. But if you're going to be shooting home movies, reviews of like equipment, or reviews of things online, like on YouTube, or like a video blogging kind of project, or just small, short, quick and sweet projects, then maybe the cell phone, your webcam, a point and shoot, or a consumer camcorder, and the GoPros, that might be a good tool for that type of job. Now, it's not to say you can't use any other tool for those things. You absolutely can, but I feel like you can definitely do a good job with a high quality cell phone, a webcam, point and shoot camera, a consumer camcorder, or a GoPro. Obviously, or maybe I should mention it here, that the more knowledge you have, the more you're able to control the tool, and the better image you'll be able to create. So if you were to give a cell phone, an iPhone, for example, to a top cinematographer in Hollywood, and you gave that same cell phone to someone that knows nothing about how to create an image, who do you think is going to create the better image? I think it's obvious, the cinematographer, right? Because he knows so much more on how to manipulate the camera, how to manipulate light, and so on and so forth. So definitely train yourself on how to use your tools better and how to make images better in general. But yeah, cell phone, webcam, point and shoot, I think will be reasonably good quality for these types of projects. Now, if you do a lot of long events with continuous coverage, or you do some sort of live editing, maybe the prosumer camcorder is more up your alley. Whether it's conferences or seminars, or even birthday parties, graduations, that kind of thing, maybe the prosumer camcorder is something that you'll be looking at because of the long duration and the professional audio inputs, and or even the autofocus functionality. And then it fits right, and it might be the lowest possible tool that works for something like that. And DSLRs, I feel, are excellent for low budget commercials, short films, and if you need to shoot still photos. I mean, that's their original purpose, and they're incredible tools to shoot still photos. But one thing I will say, definitely for the DSLR, great image quality, as I've mentioned before. And one thing is, some of these cameras have incredible low light capabilities. So if you need to shoot an event that requires low light capability because you're not able to add additional lighting, DSLR might be a good choice. You'll have to work around all of its other shortcomings, like short record times, but if you're able to figure out a way to work around that, then that might be great. Also, with that wide lens selection, you can get wide angle lenses, you can get the telephoto lenses. Again, there's going to have to be some workarounds with that. Those lenses are not built for video, so the way they focus is not the greatest focus for video or motion picture. But if you're able to work around the shortcomings of the DSLR, then it might be an excellent camera for slightly maybe higher end projects than reviewed before here. So you can use any of these tools to film anything, but I'm just trying to choose or guide you in picking maybe the least expensive tool for the job. But and these are definitely my opinion, and your situation is going to vary. So try and weigh out which is more important to you. Whether it's budget or long duration or what have you. And if you have any questions, let me know, and maybe I can help you decide. And just I guess just to reiterate, any tool can be used to do the job, but some tools just make it easier and more convenient than others. So if you could shoot an entire feature-length film with an iPhone, and there are examples. In fact, Apple has shot tremendously amazing commercials with their iPhone just to prove how good of a camera it is. But the thing is, they're using professional crews to shoot that. So it's it's using the people that have the knowledge to create an amazing image, and then the tool, they were able to use the tool with that. So it really comes down to your skill and knowledge, and I think also your budget. So if you do have any questions, please let me know. You can hit me up on Twitter at origmedia, or check out our website, www.origmedia.com. All right, so that's it, and let's get to the quote of the week. This week: concentrate all your thoughts on the task at hand. The sun's rays do not burn until brought to a focus. It's by Alexander Graham Bell. Yeah, so think about that one. Definitely, let's focus, and we can make something amazing. Again, I'm Jeff Orig with Orig Media, website www.origmedia.com, Twitter at Orig Media. Please subscribe to us on iTunes or YouTube and leave us an honest review. We want to improve, and I think that's it. So until next time, thank you and aloha.